What happens when a promise just can't be kept? In our everyday lives, that's a real problem, right? But in the world of high-stakes finance, it can be an absolute catastrophe. And that's exactly the question we're looking at today, facing one of the most important and maybe one of the most fragile markets on the entire planet, the silver market.
So is the world's most important silver market actually about to break? At the very heart of this whole story is the Comex. That's the main exchange where silver futures are traded. And the big question, the one everyone's asking, is whether its vaults, which are supposed to back trillions of dollars in trades, actually have enough physical metal to handle this rising tide of demand. And look, the stakes here, they're way bigger than just the price of a commodity. This is about the trust that holds up our entire financial system. Because, let's be honest, if a promise this big can be broken, what else can you trust?
All right, let's dive into the paper-to-physical problem and really understand the leverage here. To get what's going on, we've got to look under the hood at this fundamental mismatch between paper silver and physical silver. See, most of the trading that happens, it's not actual silver bars being trucked around. Nope, it's all paper contracts. These are basically IOUs, promises for future delivery of those bars. And that, right there, is where the trouble begins.
Okay, so to really get a grip on this, you have to know how the Comex sorts the silver in its vaults. It's actually a lot like a bank. You've got eligible silver. Think of this like a bunch of private safety deposit boxes. Yeah, the silver is in the vault, but it's privately owned. The exchange can't touch it. It's not for sale. Then you have registered silver. This is the important stuff. It's like the cash in the teller's drawer. It's the only metal that's actually available for delivery against a contract. So the key takeaway here is simple. Only that registered pile matters when it comes to backing the market.
So how much is actually in that for sale pile? Well, as of early February 2026, the data shows about 103 million ounces of registered deliverable silver. That's it. That's the entire supply available to satisfy anyone who shows up and wants to trade their paper contract for the real physical thing. So burn this number in your brain, 103 million.
All right, now let's look at the other side of the equation. How many paper promises, how many claims are out there against that little pile of metal? A jaw-dropping 429 million ounces. Just let that sink in for a second. We've got 103 million ounces of actual, available silver, and 429 million ounces in paper claims all pointing to it.
And that, my friends, is leverage in action. You can see it right here in the coverage ratio. For every 100 ounces of silver that's been promised on paper, only about 24 ounces of real deliverable metal are actually sitting in the vaults, ready to go. The whole system is built on one simple bet, that most traders will never want the hassle of taking physical delivery. And it's a system that works just fine until, it doesn't. It's the classic bank run scenario, right? Everything's stable as long as everyone doesn't show up and ask for their metal all at once.
So, with all this pressure building up, you gotta ask, what happens next? I mean, if demand for physical silver just keeps on climbing, where does this market go from here? Well, according to the analysis we're looking at, the whole system could go down one of four very, very different paths.
So what are these four potential scenarios? First, you've got what's called a managed settlement. Think of this as the bend but don't break option. Then there's force majeure, which is pretty much the dramatic game over button. Third is the chaotic market decoupling. And last but not least, you have the heavy hand of regulatory intervention. So let's break down what each of these could actually look like.
Okay, let's compare these outcomes. First up, the managed settlement. This is basically damage control. The big players start paying traders extra money, premiums, to delay taking their silver, essentially kicking the can down the road. You'd see a ton of volatility, with prices maybe bouncing around in the $80 to $120 range, but the system itself would survive. Second scenario, force majeure. This is the emergency brake. The exchange just says, we can't deliver, and defaults. They settle all the contracts in cash. So you get your money, but you don't get the physical metal you thought you were buying. And that could absolutely shatter trust in the paper market. Then you have the wildest one, market decoupling. The paper price on the screen becomes completely meaningless, a total fantasy. Meanwhile, the price for physical silver in the real world just explodes. Some analysts are even suggesting it could blow past $200 an ounce. And finally, regulatory intervention. The government could just step in and change the rules mid-game. Maybe they force everyone to sell their contracts. That would totally crush demand and bring the paper price way down, ending the squeeze by force.
Now, we need to zoom out a bit, because this whole thing isn't just happening in a vacuum. The squeeze on the Comex is really just a symptom of a much bigger global story. This isn't just about a few aggressive traders. It's about a fundamental imbalance between supply and demand that's been building and building for years.
And this quote from the analysis, man, it just gets right to the heart of the matter. 2026 marks the 6th consecutive year where global silver demand has exceeded mine supply. Think about that. For 6 years straight, we as a planet have been using more silver than we've been able to dig out of the ground. Every single year, we're just eating away at our stockpiles.
And what's fueling this squeeze? Well, this demand isn't just for coins and jewelry. It's absolutely soaring, and it's being driven by the critical industries that are literally powering our future. We're talking solar panels, AI data centers, electric vehicles, the whole shebang. And this surge is global, which creates a huge problem. Inventories over on the Shanghai exchange are also at decade lows. And that means for maybe the first time ever, the East can't just step in and easily resupply the West. There's just no easy relief valve for this pressure.
So you have all these global pressures, this long-running supply deficit, the insane industrial demand, the nearly empty vaults over in the East, and they're all converging on a single point in time, a single date to watch, a moment when all this underlying tension could finally come to a head.
Yeah, this isn't some far-off theoretical thing we're talking about anymore. The system's next major stress test is imminent. It's facing a major real-world test, and it is coming up very, very soon. Mark your calendars. The key date is February 27th, 2026. This is when the rubber is really scheduled to meet the road. So what is it about this specific day that makes it so darn important?
Well, it's called First Notice Day. And this is the day of reckoning, no joke. It's the critical day when all the traders holding these expiring paper contracts have to put their cards on the table. They have to officially declare, am I taking the cash or do I want the physical silver? And if an unusually large number of them demand the actual metal, well, that's when we're all going to find out if the vault can handle the strain, or if those cracks really start to show.
And this really brings us to the ultimate, most profound question here. For centuries, price has just been a simple agreement between a buyer and a seller. But in a market that's this leveraged, the paper price can just float miles away from physical reality. So when paper promises and that physical reality finally collide, what does price even mean? If that link finally snaps, if the promise can't be redeemed for the real thing, it forces all of us to ask a much bigger question. What is the true price of anything?